Hello everyone, and welcome to another Sony Creative Software live webinar. I'm Gary Rebholz, and today we're going to take a look at the long-awaited and the very exciting Vegas Pro 11. And what I want to do today is just give you an idea of what's new in the new version of Vegas Pro and what all the excitement is about, and show you some of the things that have been added to the application. We've got the chat window available, so go ahead and fire off your questions to the chat. We'll answer some of those at the end of the presentation, as we normally do, and then try to answer the rest of them for posting on the web page when we post the video for on-demand playback. So let's get right to it, because we got a lot to cover. So let me switch to the screen here, and let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. As I said, we'll talk about the new features that we've introduced in Vegas Pro 11, and we're going to start off with a discussion of GPU acceleration, and this is really where the main focus of Vegas Pro 11 lies. This is where all the excitement is, with GPU acceleration made possible now in Vegas Pro 11, supporting OpenCL. Any graphics card that supports the OpenCL standard, you can now take advantage of GPU acceleration for project preview and for rendering. We'll also talk about text and titling tools, OFX implementation that we've put into place, several stereoscopic 3D improvements that we've got in place now. So if you've got a pair of red cyan anaglyphic glasses handy, you might want to go grab those right now, so that when we get to that section, you can put those on and see the results of the work that I'm going to be doing. Integrated pan crop controls, new render as dialog box, sync link, all these features that I sort of call icing on the cake, and the real meat being the GPU acceleration that we're going to talk about. So these are the things that we'll talk about in today's presentation, and we'll start off by talking about the GPU acceleration. Now, the machine that I'm running the webinar on, that I'm broadcasting on, does not have a GPU graphics card in it. So we've set up another system off to the side here, and we'll turn to that to talk about the GPU acceleration. So Whitney, if you want to just pan over to the other machine here. Okay, so you can see that we've got a pretty simple setup here. We've got a HP Z600 machine. It's a beautiful machine, but it's not, it's not some super high-powered, all tricked out, especially for this demo. It's a Z600, sort of right off the shelf, and we've put into it a consumer-level graphics card that supports the OpenCL standard, and will take advantage of that for GPU assist. On the left monitor here, I've got Vegas Pro 10 open, and a test project in Vegas Pro 10, and the same project open on the right monitor here in Vegas Pro 11. And what we're going to do is just sort of compare these two as we go along. Now, the test project that I'm using is the same test project that we used for setting our benchmark numbers that you can find in the Vegas Pro pages on the website. And in fact, I believe you can also download this same project and try it on your own machine and with your own hardware configuration to see what kind of results you get. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to start playback in Vegas Pro 10, and then I'll start playback in Vegas Pro 11. That'll offset them just a little bit, so you can kind of concentrate on what's happening in Vegas Pro 10. And when you see a section of the video that struggles, that frame rate falls, then you can shift your gaze to the Vegas Pro 11 screen and see how much better it plays. So let me go over to Vegas Pro 10 and start playback. Then I'll start playback in Vegas Pro 11, and I'll put both of these into full screen mode so that you can get, oops, sorry. Let me try that again. That was user error. Let's start this playback over. Start it in 10. Start it in 11. There's 11 in full screen mode and 10 in full screen mode. So you can see in Vegas Pro 10 on the left, you can see that when we get to some of these more complex sections, we start dropping frames and things don't look that smooth. In Vegas Pro 11 we do. Now I'm running in best full on both of these apps, And I've disabled the preference that that makes the that switches to a lower quality playback. And you can see that the Vegas Pro 11 is much smoother on playback than Vegas Pro 10. So the GPU assist that we're taking advantage of here works on a number of different video effects, track motion, some pan cropping things, a number of different features that take advantage of the GPU assist. You can really tell in this sequence right here how slow Vegas Pro 10 is, how it's struggling. Vegas Pro 11 just cuts through it like butter. And as I said, these are both at best full. So that's the first place that the GPU assist really comes into play, is during project playback. And with Vegas Pro 11 now, you're able to get a much higher frame rate at a higher quality of preview. So for those of you who've struggled in the past and been frustrated that you couldn't get full frame rate preview or high frame rate preview on complex sections of your project, you can see with this demo here that the GPU assist really goes a long way to solving that problem. Okay, let's get these out of play mode here. Now the other place that the GPU assist comes into play in a big way is in the render process. So what I'm going to do is over here in Vegas Pro 10, I'll start that rendering, and then we'll start it in Vegas Pro 11, and we'll see the difference in time that it takes to render. So let's go over to Vegas Pro 10. I'm clicking the Render As button. Now in Vegas Pro 10, I'm going to render to the Sony AVC codec at the Internet 1920 1080 30p template, and I'll just kick that into gear and let it start going. So if you want to zoom in on that, oh, you've already done that. Okay, so Whitney zoomed in on Vegas Pro 10, and you can see that we're started rendering and it's chugging through it. Now let's switch over to Vegas Pro 11 here, and I'll set this up to render as well. Now when we hit the Render As dialog box, those of you who've used previous versions of Vegas Pro notice that it's quite a different dialog box. And this is one of the great new features of Vegas Pro 11 that we've introduced, is a more robust Render As dialog box. So let's just take a look at how this works a little bit. Each one of these sections has a drop-down arrow, and I can drop that arrow down to get more information about what's under that section, or in some cases, like the Render As options here, I get not only more information but also more options. So that's the first thing we've done to organize things a little bit, is add these drop-down arrows so that you can get more information. The big news is underneath the Output Format section, and we've really beefed this up quite a bit, because what we've done here is we've made it possible to sort through your formats and your templates to more easily find the ones that you want. So for instance, if I'm rendering to the main concept AVC file format, you can see that I've dropped down the drop-down arrow, and I have a number of different templates underneath it. But what's neat about this is that we've given you several different ways to sort through this information. So if I want to see just the templates that match my project settings, I can check that checkbox, and now only templates that match the project settings are shown underneath each format. So that's pretty cool. Even better, and this is one of my favorite features now about the new render dialog box, is that I can define favorites and show only my favorites. So if you look through these templates here, you can see that each one has a hollow star next to it, and I've selected the star on a couple of these formats. So if I want to select this one, I just click it to select it, and now that becomes a favorite. And what I can do is sort by my favorites. And now it's showing me just my favorites. I'm going to choose Internet 1080. I have more filter options, and I even have a search that I can do here. Now, Whitney, let's go back over to Vegas Pro 10 because we kind of forgot about our render here. We're at 60% rendering in Vegas Pro 10. So let's come back over to Vegas Pro 11. I'm going to change the name of this project so it doesn't conflict and kick it into gear with rendering. And what we should see here is a huge difference in the speed with which these render. Now, if you can see over in Vegas Pro 11, if you're watching in full screen mode, hopefully you can see that Vegas Pro 10 here is it's just approaching 70%. And it's been going for almost 3 minutes. Vegas Pro 11, we're at just over 30% and chugging through. So what we're doing here is taking advantage of the GPU the card, the graphics card in the HP computer that I've got here, to draw on that GPU for power when it comes to rendering. And we're just chugging through here in Vegas Pro 11. We're already up to 60%, 65%, and we're catching up pretty rapidly to Vegas Pro 10, which is at 82% and had a 3-minute head start. So if you can, I don't know if you can see the numbers. I guess you can't from there, but we're already at 83%. We're almost caught up, and right now Vegas Pro 11 just passed Vegas Pro 10 and is at 95%, 100% right now. Vegas Pro 11 is done with its render, and over in Vegas Pro 10, we're still only at 92%. So even though I started Vegas Pro 10, then I came over to Vegas Pro 11, and I spent a good couple of minutes talking about the Render as dialog box and pretending that I forgot we had started the render in Vegas Pro 10. Vegas Pro 10 just finished now. We still beat it with the GPU assist in Vegas Pro 11. So this is huge, huge news for people who have a lot of rendering to do and have been frustrated in the past with how long it takes to render. The GPU assist is fantastic. So in Vegas Pro 10, see if you can zoom in on that, Whitney. In Vegas Pro 10, right here, the elapsed time for the render was 4 minutes and 18 seconds. And over here in Vegas Pro 11, 1 minute and 21 seconds. So it shaved a full 3 minutes off the render time between 10 and 11. Okay, so that's the big news with GPU Assist. You can see that not only did we have much smoother project playback and a much higher frame rate at best full on Vegas Pro 11 over Vegas Pro 10, but then when we hit the render stage, it just kicked into gear, and Vegas Pro 11 just smoked Vegas Pro 10. So the GPU Assist stuff, that's what we really put a lot of time and effort into getting right, and really makes a huge difference in your workflow. Okay, let's go back to the computer screen and let's talk about some of the things that I have referred to as the icing on the cake. For a lot of people, the GPU assist stuff is enough reason all alone to upgrade to Vegas Pro 11. And we've had a ton of people already do so. But we didn't leave it at that. We did add some more features and some more improvements into the app. And so let's talk about some of those. The first thing I want to talk about lies in the area of text and titling tools. So we've changed the text and titling paradigm quite drastically. We've added 2 brand new titlers into the application. You still have access to the old text titler, which we now call legacy text. Let me zoom in here, see if you can see these a little bit better. Okay, we still have the old titler called legacy text, and we still have the prototype titler, which we've made a couple of small usability improvements to, and I'll show you those. And we've added 2 new titlers, the Titles and Text titler. This is the one that we're sort of turning to as the new basic text titler, that you just want to get some text up quickly. You can use this. And also, and we're all real excited about partnering up with NewBlue to include the NewBlue Titler Pro in your purchase of Vegas Pro 11. So let's take a quick look at each one of these. I'll start with the legacy text. If you've used previous versions of Vegas, you're probably familiar with this, but I'll just run over it real quickly. Let me zoom back out so you can see what I'm going to do here. Okay, so if you're familiar with this, you know that you just choose it from the list on the left, and then you've got a bunch of different templates, and you can take that template and drop it into your project. It brings up the controls where you can change font, size, and all that stuff. I'm not going to really go over that, but in the video preview window, you can see that the text is there and that it's in the timeline. Okay, so that's the standard text tool. It's always been in Vegas Pro and is still in Vegas Pro. We've just moved it and called it the legacy text. So if you've got old Vegas Pro projects that you've used that that text generator in, no problem. You can still bring those projects into Vegas Pro 11 and that text will be supported perfectly. Okay, next, the ProType Titler. Now, some of you are familiar with the ProType Titler from previous versions, and it works the same way. I choose it from the list, choose a preset, and drop it into my project. Place my cursor into that event, and you see that text in the video preview window. Now, there are a couple of usability improvements that we've made to the ProType Titler, so let's go over those real quickly. In previous versions of ProType Titler, if you've been using that, you know that you had some options down here: curves, effects, gradients, and collections. Well, we've moved the links to those tools to more logical places. So for instance, if you want to start out with a collection, we've moved the button we've moved the button to access those collections to a more logical place, and that is over here in the keyframe timeline where you would typically be working with them, and that's this button right here. So now if I click the collections button, it brings up the pop-up list, the same choices of collections that we had before. If I choose one, I can choose it from the list and decide which one I want to use. And if I decide that, let's say this bounce is the one I want to use, I just double click it and it now is added to my project as a collection that I can modify. Okay, so the collections button is moved down into the keyframe controller area to make it easier and more logical to find. Same with the other buttons, the other effects button. So now the effects button is right next to the effects that we're working on. So if I click that, now I have my effects in the list. The gradient fill button is next to the gradient controls. So it's just a much more logical place for these tools. The curves button, if you've used curves in the past, let's just move this one out of the way. The curves now are accessible right down here by the curves with a simple right click. Just right click where you want the curve, choose Add Curve, choose the one you want from the list, and then place it where you want it. Modify it, do whatever you need to do with it. So those tools are just in a more logical location and next to the controls for the tools that they relate to. Now the new titlers that we have, the first one is the text and titles generator. And just like all other media generators, you choose it in the list on the left and you get a number of different presets on the right. Now if you point to these presets, you'll notice that the preset animates. So one thing that the titles and text tool brings to the party that the old text titler didn't is animation. And these preset animations, you can just go ahead and point to them and see what they look like. If you want one of those in your project, you just drop it in. If you just want simple text with no animation, just drop the default preset into your project and drop it in there. And I'll zoom in a little bit on the dialog box so you can get a better look at that. Right about there. Okay, so just like you would expect in a titler, you've got your sample text here. You can select it and change it however you want. I'll actually make 2 lines of text here. Let's put it over in the move the cursor so you can see it in the timeline when I pull out a little bit here. But you can see that I've got all the normal font, size, bold, italic, all the stuff that you'd normally want to be able to do with your text. You've got some text colors here. Now notice that you have drop-down arrows much like the ones that we saw in the Render As dialog box. So if you want more options, click the drop-down arrows and you get more options. So you've got a location, you've got an advanced tab here that lets you work with the background, with tracking, spacing, and so forth. line spacing, which also known as leading, space between the two lines of text. So all of this stuff is easily accessible. Just click the drop-down arrow and get to the tools you want. Now earlier I said if you wanted text that didn't have animation, you could just add that default preset. But you can always add animation later with the animation control. So if I drop down the animation drop-down list here, you can see that I've got all kinds of different animations to choose from. So if you just want something quick and you want to put a little bit of animation on it quickly and you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to dial it in with the ProType titler, then you can come to the titles and text generator and just choose an animation. Now if you want more control over it, the ProType titler is always there and you can get full control. Now one of my favorite features of the new titles and text tool is, and I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit so that you can see this. When I've got the tool open, you can see that there's a box around the text in my preview window. And that box is editable. So if I want to make the text smaller, I can make it smaller. If I want to move it, I can move it. Just gives me a more instantaneous control over where my text is or how big my text is and so forth. And anytime I've got the Video Media Generators window open with the Titlers tool in it, that box is going to show up and allow me to move and resize my text as I want. Okay, so that's pretty cool. The fourth titler is the one a lot of people are really excited about, and that is the New Blue Titler Pro. And we've partnered up with the guys at New Blue to include this with your purchase of Vegas Pro 11. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this tool today because I intend to do next month's webinar focusing greatly, if not completely, on this tool because it's a very robust and powerful tool that you can use to create text. But I do want to give you a quick idea of what this tool enables you to do. This tool gives you the power to put your text, you could be as basic with the text as you want, just like the preset that I've got open right now. The text is very basic. Or you could get as sophisticated as you want. And I'm going to try to rearrange things here a little bit so I can zoom in as much as possible and let you see the tool and the preview window at the same time. I can't zoom in much more than that. But what I can do with this tool is I can start adding different elements to it, to the text, that give me all kinds of power. So right now, by default, the text comes up in what New Blue calls a 3D face. And if I go back to the Object tab here, you can see that I can use the tools here to rotate the text in 3D. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it maybe a little more effectively. So I can rotate it in the X, and I can rotate it in the Y, and so forth. Okay, now you could always do that with Vegas Pro's 3D track motion. But what you couldn't do was add extrusion to this text to make it look like it was actual 3D. And you can do that with the new titler. So what I'm going to do is go back to the Style tab and scroll down a little bit here, and you can see that I've got an extrusion option. Okay, so I can add extrusion. Okay, now right now my text is white, so it doesn't really look like much, but you can see that I'm adding some extrusion to this text. Let's go back up to the color picker here and choose something different. So I can choose solid color like I have here with white. I can choose a gradient, or I can choose a texture, and I can choose any texture that any of the default textures that come with the titler, or I can basically import any JPEG or PNG file to use as a texture. And so there we have a texture, and you can now see that things are more extruded. So if I go and play with the extrusion a little bit, you can see now a little bit more effectively what that looks like. Okay, so that's the down and dirty basics of this titler, and that's the thing to be excited about with the titler. You can see that I can now move it, and that extrusion just shows up in whatever orientation I put it in. In next month's webinar, I'll talk much more deeply about adding different styles, different 2D styles and 3D styles. I can add 2D styles that include shadow and outline and a face. I can add a 3D outline, as many faces and outlines as I want. So you could actually start getting pretty crazy with this and doing some pretty neat things to create your text. So as long as I'm talking about it, let's just go back, and I will just do something real quick here. Let's take the extrusion off the face, and then I'll add a 3D outline. Now that 3D outline gives me some extrusion already. I can put a different texture on that extrusion than I have on the face. So let's say I want to put, let's put this one on there, kind of a chrome look. And so you can see now that I've got the 3D outline, and I can change the extrusion on that as well. So I can really start to get sophisticated here. And next month, I'm going to really kind of dig into this tool and show you some pretty cool things that you can do with it. So those are the new text offerings in Vegas Pro 11, and some pretty exciting stuff there. Let's move on to another really useful feature, which is called SyncLink. Now SyncLink is, you can sort of think of it as related to grouping, the grouping that's always been in Vegas Pro. But it gives you more flexibility than grouping. So let's just kind of take a quick look at this. What I've got in the timeline here are 3 events, and right now they're not related at all other than their orientation on the timeline. So what I've always been able to do in Vegas Pro is to select each of these, right-click one of them, choose Group, and Create New. Now when I group items together like that, if I move one, I move them all. And it doesn't matter which one I grab. If I grab the center one, they all move, right? They all move. Now, in a lot of cases, this is exactly what you want. For instance, you probably want your video grouped with the audio that goes with it so that you don't get out of sync. But sometimes it doesn't work out the way you want it to work out. So for instance, let's say on this bottom clip, I decide I want to edit that, and I want to make it shorter. No problem, I can make it shorter or longer until I reach the edge of another event that is grouped to. And now notice that event is moving with it. In fact, I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it even maybe just a little bit more effectively. Okay? As I edit this first event, if I hit the edge of the event that is grouped to, it starts editing that event as well. And that's not what I want. In this case, all I wanted to do was to make this bottom one shorter. So in this case, I'm going to take the grouping off. What would be a better option for me is the new SyncLink feature. So again, I'm going to select all of those events. And with SyncLink, what you basically have is one event that sort of acts like a control event and controls the events that are linked to it, that are related to it. In this case, I'll make this central event here on the middle track the control event. So I right-click it and choose Create SyncLink with selected events. Okay. Now notice the purple or the magenta outline. What this does for me is now with the control event, if I move it, just like with grouping, they all move with it. But notice something about the events that I've linked to this. Notice the one on the top track. It doesn't reach the top of the track, and the one on the bottom doesn't reach the bottom of the track. And this indicates that these are synced through a sync link to something else. And the space indicates what direction the control event lies. So the space is on the opposite direction of where the control lies. So if I move the control, they all move with it. But the beauty of this is that if I move one of the items that's, oh, these two are still grouped. Sorry, let me ungroup those. So I've cleared the group, and let's go and reestablish. There we go. My sync link is still there. So now if I move one of the individual pieces of the sync link, the others don't move with it. And if I go back to that same edit I made before where I'm trimming the one, it doesn't trim all of them like it did when they were grouped. But even though I've changed these and moved them around, the control event still controls the whole SyncLink, group. So you can see that this gives you a little bit more flexibility. Now I've used video events here, but one great example of when this might be really useful is if you're using, you've got a bunch of audio events that are Foley or sound effects, and you might need to go in and tweak those without tweaking the video that you want them related to. Well, you could create a sync link, go in and move the audio events as much as you need to, and then move the whole thing when you need to move the whole thing. So sync links is sort of a more flexible way of making a relationship between events on your timeline. Grouping is still a great tool, and you're going to still use grouping a lot, but SyncLink just gives you a little bit more flexibility and another option. All right. The next item I want to talk about, and you kind of saw this already, although I didn't really mention it specifically, is the OFX implementation in Vegas Pro 11. In Vegas Pro 10, we introduced the concept of OFX for video plugins, media generators, transitions, and so forth. And we had a couple of, we introduced it with the stereoscopic 3D adjust tool that we added in Vegas Pro 10 as our first OFX plugin. But now we've ported all of our filters and effects over to OFX, and let's take a look at that and see why that matters. So if I wanted to add an effect to this top track here, I can go to my video effects, and let's say we want to do some color correction on that with the secondary color corrector tool, and I'll drop that onto the event. Okay. Now I'm not really going to do any color correction, but I just want you to be able to see the tools here. So zoom in just a little bit. Okay. If you're familiar with previous versions of Vegas Pro, you know that there was a keyframe controller area on the bottom where if you wanted to create some sort of animation in your filter and wanted to change the effect over time or whatever, you needed to go down to that one area. And it was a very powerful tool and very useful. But it did have its limitations in that you had only one timeline to add a keyframe to and then change all the parameters. And so you couldn't really do it individually. One of the big things that OFX plugins bring to Vegas Pro 11 is the ability to animate different parameters and controls separately from other ones. So you notice this button right here. It's the animate button right next to every single control in this dialog box. So if I click one of these and expand my view a little bit here so you can see it, you can see that now I have a keyframe controller area. And that keyframe controller area is for this chrominance control. So I could come in here and add a keyframe and change the chrominance over time however I wanted to change it. You know, if I wanted to change the fade of it or whatever, or change the setting, I can do that with this keyframe controller area. But what's neat is if I also wanted to control, let's say, my saturation over time, I can animate that as well. And now I've got the chrominance keyframe timeline, and I've got a saturation keyframe timeline. So if I add another keyframe here, or maybe I want to add this keyframe over here, I have total independence of those keyframes. I can change to the curves view and get a little bit better view of here's my saturation. Let's go to chrominance. Here's my X, and I can change my X. I can change my Y. Go back to my saturation. So I've got complete control over these things on an individual basis with this new keyframe controller area that is made possible by the OFX implementation. So in addition to OFX implementation in Vegas Pro 10 and now 11, opening up a world of different plugins from third-party vendors that now just work in Vegas Pro because they are written in OFX. In addition to that, you now have this great flexibility with your keyframe controller area. You also have control over your view with the columns view, 1, 2, or 3 different columns depending on how the developer created defined the parameters. So a lot of different controls and a lot of different advantages that OFX implementation brings to Vegas Pro. Okay, another thing that I want to talk about in relation to effects. Whoops, I docked that accidentally. Let me get that off of there and make this a little smaller. Is that we've now changed some things with the pan crop tool. And I want to show you how this works. You've always had the ability in Vegas Pro to take the pan crop and make it pre-effect or post-effect. But it was a difficult feature to understand and a difficult feature to find. And so we've broken this out now and made it much easier to see what you're doing. And what we've basically done is we've gotten rid of the old event pan crop dialog box, and now instead the event pan crop tools, which haven't changed, now appear in the video effects window, the video event effects window. So let's take, for instance, this clip down here that I've got. I'm just going to add a noise filter to that clip. And I'll turn off the animate. And in the video preview window, let's make this smaller and move this over and see if I can zoom in on this a little bit so that you can see this more effectively. Okay, so in the video preview window, you can see that we've got noise on that event. I can now access the pan crop tool just by clicking the pan crop flag here button, and now I've got my pan crop tools. And what I want you to notice is I'm going to zoom in on this picture and notice what happens to the noise when I zoom in. As I zoom in, hopefully you can see this over the internet. Let me make the noise bigger so that just more obvious. Hopefully you can see that as I zoom in, the noise doesn't change. Just the picture underneath the noise changes, right? So what we're doing here is we're changing the event pan crop pre the noise filter. And if you look at the chain of effects up here, you can see that pan crop comes before the add noise filter. That's called pre mode. Now I can also change it so that the pan crop comes after the add noise filter, and that would be post mode. And if I do that, I just drag it over there, and now pan crop is in post mode. So in other words, now Vegas Pro is going to add the noise and then add the results of the pan crop. And what you'll see, hopefully, is that now when I zoom in, not only am I zooming in on the picture itself, but if I go far enough, you can see that I'm zooming in on the noise. Okay, now I want to open a new project, and if you have a pair of anaglyphic stereoscopic anaglyphic glasses, I'll go back to the camera here quickly and show you mine. If you have a pair of these, go ahead and put them on now, and you'll be able to see the results of what I'm about to do here with the new stereoscopic tools that we've added. Now, of course, we added stereoscopic editing in Vegas Pro 10 and really kind of shook the video editing world with those tools, and really those tools are still still industry standard kind of tools, but we've made them even better. So here I've got a picture, 3D project, and I've got a clip up that has problems. If you've got your 3D glasses on, I'm going to zoom in here on the video preview window so you can see that better. Let's see if I've still got my zoom tools here. Hold on. Okay, it looks like whatever happened before disabled my zoom tools. So let's just pull this out, and I'll make it bigger this way so you can see it a little bit better. Okay. You can see if you've got anaglyphic glasses on that we've got a nice 3D shot here with this woman in the background. She's kind of set back behind screen depth, and then the interviewer in the foreground set in front of screen depth. But what we have here is a problem, and that is we have an edge violation. And an edge violation occurs when you've got something that's positioned in the 3D space to be in front of the screen, but yet it touches the edge of the screen. Because the fact that it touches the edge of the screen sends conflicting signals to your brain through your eyes, and all of a sudden the 3D starts to not make sense. It starts to bother your eyes. So what we've done, let's dock this back down here. What we've done is we've added to the stereoscopic 3D adjust tool, and so let me get that tool and add it to the project here. I'm going to add that to the event. Now you might typically want to add it to the media, but in this case I'll just put it on the event. And what we've added is called floating windows. Now keep your eye on the right side of the video preview window where we have the screen edge violation. And what I can do is I can add a bar on the side of that, which basically removes the screen violation by not letting the 3D hit the edge of the screen. Now if you're not wearing anaglyphic glasses, you probably see something that looks sort of cyan. If you are wearing anaglyphic glasses, you see a black bar. And it's very noticeable to you right now because, of course, I've drawn your attention to it and I'm showing it to you. But in the normal course of a 3D project, these bars are added in and out all the time, even in Hollywood productions, to account for and correct for screen edge violations. So you've got the ability to do that now in Vegas Pro, and I can do it on the left and I can do it on the right as well. So that's the first thing I can do with the new tools. Let me go ahead and open up. I'm going to reopen this project just to set everything back. Now another thing we've done is we've added some stereoscopic adjustments tools to a couple of transitions, the iris transition and the cross effect transition and the cookie cutter filter. And I'll show you what these tools can do. So here I've got a crossfade transition between these two clips. And I'll go to my transitions tab and add just the iris transition. Okay. And let me just back up in the timeline a little bit so you can kind of see a little more effectively what's going on here. So as this iris comes into view, if you have your 3D glasses on, you can kind of see that we have, again, conflicting signals to our eyes, because that iris comes in, when that circle comes in, it kind of looks like it's behind the lady who's sitting on the grass in the foreground. And as I come through, when it actually intersects with her, it messes with your head because it looks like it's going to be behind, but yet it's covering her up. So what we can do is to use the new stereoscopic 3D depth adjustment in the iris filter, and I'm going to add a little bit of negative here and bring that circle out. Let me put a border on the circle because that seems to make it more obvious what's going on. So now when you look at that, now I've brought the iris circle out into 3D space further than the woman sitting on the grass. So now it doesn't hurt your brain anymore because she looks like she's farther back, and in fact she's being covered up as we go through the transition. She's being covered up by the circle. So it makes perfect sense to your brain, and everything looks great. So that new stereoscopic 3D depth adjustment in the iris transition is one place that we've added it. And I'm going to go open this again just to reset everything once again. And the other place we've added it is with the cookie cutter filter. And let me just pull the one clip down below the other. So now we've got, a standard composite going here with these two 3D tracks. If I mute the top track, you can see that we've got the lady sitting on the grass and we've got a couple walking across the park. So what I want to do is to add the 3D, or add the cookie cutter filter to that top track, and we're going to create just like a little badge or a little emblem, where now I'll add a border to make that a little more obvious. We've added the circle. I'll make it a little smaller and move it over so that we've got our heroine in the circle. Okay? So So we've got the cookie cutter in there, which is cutting, basically letting us just see a hole in the top track and seeing through to the bottom track. Now, if you've got your 3D glasses on again, what you notice is that the circle is out farther than the image inside the circle. And so that's kind of messing with our eyes a little bit. So maybe we don't want that to happen. We can use the stereoscopic 3D depth control in the cookie cutter now to move the circle back a little bit. And I'll move it back so it's on the same plane as the woman in the picture. Okay, great. It looks wonderful, but we have a problem. And the problem is, if I step through this, you see the couple approaching on the grass, and they're closer to us in the 3D, in the Z depth, in the 3D plane, than the picture, right? So our eye right now is telling us, oh, those two are going to walk in front of that picture. But remember, the rules of compositing don't change just because we're in 3D. And if you look at the timeline, the top track is going to overwrite the bottom track. So instead of walking in front of that picture, if I step through this and I get far enough, they walk in back of it. And all of a sudden, once again, your eye is receiving conflicting signals here because they looked closer, but all of a sudden they went behind, and your brain hurts. This is not good 3D. So the solution we came up with didn't quite work. So we're going to have to try something different. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to bring the circle back out where it was. In fact, I'm going to bring it out even further so that it's way out front. And now again, the picture of the woman the video of the woman behind it is set back off the circle, so that's kind of messing with us a little bit. So I'm going to add a media effect, and I'll add the same stereoscopic 3D adjust filter to that track, and now I can bring her out a little bit, and I can bring her to the same plane as the circle, or if I want to get even a little bit more creative, I might bring her out a little bit more. So now she's sort of popping out from the circle, and we've created something that looks like a 3D emblem or something. And as when we go back down to the timeline and step through, we see that now as our happy couple approaches the emblem, everything looks good. They look like they're going to walk behind it, and as I step through it, sure enough, they walk behind it. Doesn't hurt your head anymore. That's good 3D. So those are some powerful new additions to the 3D tools that we've included in Vegas Pro. Okay, let me switch back to my PowerPoint presentation here just to make sure I haven't missed anything. And nope, I haven't. Okay, so that's a look at Vegas Pro 11. Okay, well, let's talk about the webinar promotion that we've got going on right now. You could save on Vegas Pro 11 on all purchases and upgrades to Vegas Pro 11. You can upgrade from a previous version of Vegas Pro for only $149.95 US. Upgrade from any version of Vegas Movie Studio for only $299.95, or purchase a new copy of Vegas Pro starting at $599.95. So those are some pretty good prices, some pretty aggressive pricing for Vegas Pro, and that offer is good until the end of November. So you've got a good month to take advantage of that, those offers. So let's go ahead and see if we can do some questions. I'm just not able to bring myself up on camera like I normally do, so apologize for that. So you got any questions there, Michael?
As a matter of fact, we have a bunch of questions. So we'll start off with this one. Can you choose when to use the GPU and when to use the CPU? So I think what they mean there is there a preference or something that you can check, or does it happen automatically?
Yeah, you can, well, actually both. It does happen automatically during the render process, but you do have control over it. When you're working on your project and you want to decide whether you want to use GPU assistance during playback, just go to Options, Preferences, and on the Video tab, there's a new box or a new drop-down list called the GPU Acceleration of Video Processing. If I click on that, you can see that my webinar machine does not have GPU enabled graphics card on it. If it did, that card would be listed right here underneath off, and I could either choose it or turn it off. So during playback, yeah, I can do it right there on Options Preferences on the Video tab. During render, I can also use it, and I'm not sure because I don't have a card on this machine if this is actually going to show up, but with the main concept AVC file type, and I'll use the 1080 template. If I go to Customize Template, down at the bottom is a box called Encode Mode. And right now it's set to automatic, which is the recommended setting. But if you have a GPU card, you can set it to GPU if available, or render using CPU only. So if for some reason you wanted to render with just your CPU, you could do it there. So two different places where you can override the automatic settings.
Okay, another person was asking for more details about how you ran your test. They're wanting to know, were we looking at two different PCs? Did they have different hardware? Was it the same PC? How'd that work?
It's just a single computer, an HP Z600 computer, basically just an off-the-shelf model computer with a GPU-enabled graphic card in there that supports OpenCL. And then I just had Vegas Pro 10 on the left monitor and Vegas Pro 11 on the right monitor, and just played them simultaneously.
So you were running two instances of Vegas simultaneously?
Yep, one Vegas Pro 10, one Vegas Pro 11.
Okay. Another person is asking, how will it work on an i7 PC that does not have a supported video card?
Just like the one that I'm using here, it should just work just as it always has. You just obviously can't take advantage of the GPU assistance. But everything else that I showed worked just fine.
A lot of people are asking, will this version 11 work on XP?
Version 11 does not work on XP. You have to have Vista or Windows 7. XP, I know we don't like to admit that we're getting older, but XP is old technology now, and we're moving on along with Microsoft.
Okay, back to the 3D workflow that you were talking about, where you had the picture-in-picture going on. Somebody's asking, is there a way that you could adjust that so that the people would walk in front of a picture-in-picture?
Well, that's an interesting question. They look like they're going to walk in front of it, but remember, as I said, just because we're working in 3D and we're placing things in the Z-axis, bringing them in or out of the screen plane, doesn't mean that the rules of compositing in Vegas Pro work any differently. They work the same as they always have. So you're always going to have the track that's on the top in the timeline show above the track that's below it on the timeline. So those people are in the track below it. So when they walk under there, no matter what I do with my stereoscopic tools, they're going to walk behind that thing. It's just a matter of, do I make it hurt your brain or do I do something to make it help? Now, if you really wanted to do some sophisticated and frame-by-frame Bezier masking, you could break those two people out of the picture, like we did when we talked about still images in the previous webinar. You could break them out onto a separate track and then do some different type of compositing to put them and make them walk over the top of the emblem, but that'd be a lot of work on a piece of video.
Okay, and the next question is there any we can't see read what this word is, but it says between 32-bit and 64-bit. So I guess they're asking, is there, in regard to using a GPU card, is there a benefit between 32 and 64?
Well, I think there's just in general always a benefit to using 64. You just got much more horsepower and much more much more oomph to throw at your projects. So I don't know technically if there's an advantage to using GPU. If I don't know technically the answer to that question, but in general, 64-bit is just going to be your better performing option.
And I've had several people asking, how do they know if their card is supported? And I did, if you look in the chat, I did post the link to our page that talks about GPU acceleration. And I guess while I'm on that topic, I'd also like to invite everybody to test drive. You can get a trial version right from our website, fully functional for 30 days. Test it with your particular hardware setup. And while we're on that topic, I could also invite you to download the same project and media that Gary was using in his test to try it out with your hardware and see what kind of performance that you get.
Okay, I think that's probably all we have time for. As I mentioned, next month I'm going to be doing a webinar focusing pretty heavily on the NewBlue Titler Pro. That's included with your purchase of Vegas Pro 11, so I hope you can join us then. So thanks very much for being here, and I hope to see you next month. So long.